Somewhere beneath the dark canopy of the Amazon, long after the sun has stopped reaching the ground, the rain begins again. It does not arrive as a shower or a passing squall. It arrives as a wall, a hammering weight of water that turns leaves into drums and streams into rivers and rivers into inland seas. The air becomes almost solid with warmth and moisture. Everything drips. Everything smells of wet bark and fermenting fruit and living soil. And somewhere inside this steaming green world, a man crouches on the forest floor, motionless, listening for the soft crack of a twig above him, where a spider monkey is moving through the branches 60 feet overhead. He is nearly naked. His only shelter for miles around is a house made of leaves. His only weapon is a hollow reed. And yet he is not lost. And he is not afraid. He is home. The peoples of the Amazon have lived inside this rainforest for thousands of years. Among them are the Yanomami, whose territory stretches across the border highlands of southern Venezuela and northern Brazil, along the headwaters of the Orinoco and the upper Rio Branco. Around them, along the great rivers and their countless tributaries, live many other nations of the forest, peoples such as the Yaquana, the Piaroa, the Ashaninka, the Matsis, the Kayapo, the Shipibo, the Wairani, the Achuar. They speak different languages and follow different customs, and they should never be flattened into one image. But they share something profound. They have made a life inside a place that Europeans, arriving centuries ago, called the Green Hell. And they have made that life not by fighting the forest, but by knowing it. To understand how they survive, we must first understand the forest itself. The Amazon basin is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth. It covers an area larger than the whole of Western Europe. The rain here is not a season, but a condition. In many parts, more than 3,000 millimeters of water fall each year, and in some places, closer to 5,000. Rivers rise and swell during the flooded months until the forest itself becomes water. Trees stand knee-deep, then waist-deep, then chest-deep in slow brown floodwater, and the fish swim between their roots. When the rains ease, the water retreats, leaving black mud and stranded logs and a fresh layer of silt on the forest floor. Above, the canopy closes over everything like a green roof. Sunlight rarely reaches the ground. Down there, in the permanent twilight, the air is heavy, warm, and still. The temperature almost never drops below the low 20s in Celsius. Fungus blooms on fallen wood in a matter of hours. Iron rusts. Leather rots. A knife blade left in a hut for a week can be furred with red corrosion. Anything organic, if it is not eaten by insects, will be dissolved by mold before the month is out. Nothing here lasts. Nothing is permanent. And so the peoples of the forest have learned to live with impermanence, to build and rebuild, to move and remake, to hold their world lightly. The Yanomami answer to the endless rain is a house called the Shabono. Imagine a great circular ring of thatched roof, sometimes as wide across as a small football field, sloping inward toward an open plaza at the center. From above, it looks like a green donut resting on the forest floor. The outer wall is low, made of leaves and poles. The inner edge of the roof is open to the sky so that light and air can reach the central clearing. Under the ring itself, each family has its own hearth, its own hammocks, its own bundles of belongings, its own space along the wall. But there is no partition between one hearth and the next. Everyone lives together, breathing the same smoke, hearing the same conversations, sleeping under the same continuous roof. The Shabono is a marvel of tropical architecture. The palm leaf thatch is layered so densely that even the most violent downpour becomes only a whispering hiss above the heads of those inside. Water runs off the steep slope, gathers in the central plaza where it can be used or absorbed by the earth, and drains away through the outer edge. The whole building is made from materials gathered within a short walk. When it grows old, when the thatch begins to rot or the insects multiply in the beams, the community simply abandons it and builds another somewhere nearby. The forest reclaims the old Shabono within a season or two, and the ground where it stood turns back into green. Other peoples of the Amazon, particularly those who live closer to the great rivers, build differently. Along the flooded lowlands, houses often stand on stilts, raised well above the highest expected water. Their platforms are made of split palm trunks, springy and slightly damp underfoot, but resistant to rot. Roofs are pitched steeply, thatched with layers of palm fronds arranged like feathers. Walls are often only partial, letting the humid air pass through, keeping the inside cooler than the outside. In some houses, there is barely any wall at all, just posts, a floor, a roof, and the sound of the river below. Life is lived open to the forest, not sealed against it. Inside every one of these dwellings, whether Shabono or stilted river house, the most important object is not a wall or a door. It is the hammock. In a world where the ground is wet, where snakes and biting insects move at ground level, where scorpions hide in leaf litter and centipedes cross the earth in the dark, the hammock lifts human beings into the air. It is a small, suspended island, private and portable. During the day, it is folded away or used as a chair. At night, it becomes a bed. Between two posts, a hammock takes less than a minute to hang, and even less to take down. This is how a whole household can be dismantled and moved, if need be, in the span of a morning. The forest itself provides the food, but it does not give it freely. It must be hunted, gathered, coaxed, and, in the case of some plants, argued with. The hunter of the deep forest is famous for a weapon that seems almost impossibly delicate for such a serious purpose. It is the blowgun, called by different names in different languages, a long, slender tube, sometimes as much as 3 meters in length, made of 2 carefully hollowed sections of palm wood, bound together with plant resin and fiber. Through this tube, using nothing but breath, a hunter can send a tiny wooden dart with astonishing accuracy up into the highest branches of the canopy, where the monkeys and birds live. The blowgun by itself would only sting. What makes it lethal is the poison on the tip of the dart. This poison is known in the outside world as curare. It is a mixture, a recipe rather than a single substance, prepared from the bark and stems of certain forest vines, most often plants of the genera Strychnos and Chondrodendron. The bark is scraped and boiled for hours, sometimes with the addition of other plants that thicken the mixture or increase its effect. The result is a dark, sticky paste that the hunter carries in a small gourd. Each dart is dipped into this paste at the tip. When the dart pierces the skin of a monkey high in the branches, the curare enters the blood and paralyzes the muscles. The animal loses its grip and falls. The knowledge of curare is one of the most sophisticated pharmacological achievements of any human society. It works only when it enters the bloodstream. Meat from an animal killed by curare is completely safe to eat because the digestive system does not absorb the poison in the same way. This means that a hunter can strike a monkey in the canopy, retrieve it when it falls, and prepare it for the fire without any risk. The recipe for curare varies from one nation to another and from one experienced maker to another. In some places, it is a closely guarded knowledge, refined over generations, tested carefully, adjusted for strength and stickiness and speed of action. Along with the blowgun, hunters use bows and arrows, especially for larger and heavier prey. A tapir, the great forest ungulate that browses along stream banks, or a herd of white-lipped peccaries moving through the underbrush like small dark boars, or a curassow bird stepping cautiously through the leaf litter. These are hunted with long arrows, sometimes tipped with iron traded from far away, sometimes still tipped with cane or bone, feathered with the plumage of forest birds. The hunt is not a matter of chance, it is a matter of reading the forest. A broken twig, a scuff of mud on a tree root, a certain silence in a corner of the canopy, the faint musk of a peccary herd hanging in the still air. All of these are signs. A skilled hunter can move for hours through the dim understory without making a sound. His feet know the difference between a soft, rotten leaf that will give way silently and a dry, curled one that will crack. He knows the calls of every bird and can imitate many of them. He knows which trees are fruiting this month and therefore where the monkeys will be, which watercourses the tapir prefers, which patches of ground the wild pigs like to root. The forest, which seems chaotic and unreadable to an outsider, is to him an ordered geography of scents, sounds, and living pathways. Rivers, of course, provide another kind of food, and here another set of skills comes into play. In the clear, shallow tributaries, some peoples hunt fish with bows and arrows, just as they hunt animals on land. Long, thin arrows are shot down into the water, aiming ahead of the target to compensate for the refraction. Others build traps, funnel-shaped weirs of woven sticks placed across a narrow channel, or portable basket traps set among the roots and stones. But perhaps the most striking method of fishing in the Amazon involves not a hook, not a spear, not a net, but a plant. The plant is called timbo in some places, barbasco in others. It refers to several different vines and shrubs whose stems contain a natural compound known to biologists as rotenone. To fish with timbo, a group of people first choose a suitable pool. Sometimes this is a natural bend in a small stream. Sometimes it is a section of river that has been dammed with logs, mud, and leaves to slow the flow. Then the vines are gathered, brought to the bank, and beaten with wooden clubs against stones or logs until the fibers burst and the sap begins to run. The battered mass is thrown into the water or held under and stirred until the pool turns milky. The rotenone in the sap does not poison the meat of the fish for human eaters, but it interferes with the way the fish absorb oxygen from the water. Within minutes, the fish begin to rise to the surface, gasping, stunned. People wade in from all sides with baskets and spears and simple bare hands. In the space of an afternoon, an entire community can catch enough fish to eat well for days. The technique works best in the dry months when water levels are low, when the pools are small, and the concentration of the plant can build up. After the harvest, the current gradually washes the pool clean, and within a short time, the surviving fish return. Timbo fishing is a communal event, coordinated among many hands. It is also a good example of the way Amazonian peoples use precise, accumulated knowledge to solve a hard problem. They know exactly which plants contain the active compound and which do not. They know how strong a given batch will be. They know how to seal a pool so that the effect concentrates. They know when to fish, and equally importantly, they know when to stop, because using the plant too often in the same stretch of water will empty it. Then there is manioc, the great root that feeds much of the Amazon. The variety most widely used, called bitter manioc, or by scientists Manihot esculenta, is a poisonous plant. Its tuber, thick and starchy underneath the skin, contains compounds that release cyanide when the flesh is broken. Eaten raw or eaten unprocessed, bitter manioc will kill. Its neighbor, sweet manioc, is much less dangerous and can be simply roasted. But bitter manioc gives higher yields and stores better in the field, so much of Amazonia relies on it. Which means that much of Amazonia relies on knowing how to remove the poison. The process is patient and methodical. The tubers are dug up, carried back to the settlement, and peeled with knives or hard shells. The white flesh is grated against rough boards studded with sharp stones or the teeth of piranha fish until it becomes a coarse, damp pulp. Then, in one of the most elegant tools in the whole Amazon, this pulp is fed into a long, woven tube called a tipiti. The tipiti looks like a strange, stretched braid. When empty, it is loose and open. When filled with wet manioc mash and hung from a rafter, and then pulled downward by a weight or by a person sitting on a lever, the tipiti squeezes tight, expelling the poisonous juice through its walls and out the bottom. This juice, dripping down into a bowl on the floor, is not thrown away. If it is boiled hard for a long time, the cyanide gases off, and the remaining liquid becomes a savory sauce, thickened with the same starch, and often used to cook meat and fish. Nothing is wasted. Meanwhile, the pressed flour left inside the tipiti is dried, sieved, and toasted on a great flat clay griddle, turned constantly with a wooden paddle until it becomes fine, crunchy grains. This toasted flour, sometimes called farinha in the trade languages of the region, will keep for weeks, even in the wettest weather, and can be eaten straight, mixed with water into a porridge, sprinkled over fish, or molded into flat cakes and baked. The invention of this process is one of humanity's quiet triumphs. Somewhere in the deep past, someone learned that a deadly plant could be turned into a staple food, and that knowledge spread across an entire continent. Today, the whole cassava trade of the world descends, ultimately, from the patience of Amazonian gardeners who worked out the puzzle of the tipiti. Manioc is only the largest strand in a much wider net of food. In the small gardens near a shabono or a stilt house, other crops grow between the manioc stems. Bananas and plantains stand in ragged clumps, their broad leaves tearing in the wind. Sweet potatoes hide their tubers underground. Pineapples cluster in low, prickly stands. Chili peppers dry on strings under the eaves. Sugarcane grows tall along the edges. Beyond the garden, the forest itself is a larder for those who know it. Wild fruits ripen in different months on different trees, and the calendar of the year is measured not in weeks, but in fruiting seasons. There are the Brazil nuts, enormous woody pods that fall from the canopy with such force that they can kill an unwary hunter walking beneath. There are the acai palms, whose deep purple berries yield a thick, oily pulp. There is the peach palm, called pupunha, with its bright orange fruits full of starch and oil. There is the aguaje palm, whose scaly red fruit tastes almost like avocado. There are the babasu and the morichi and countless others, each with its own season, its own uses, its own place in the year. Honey, too, is gathered wherever it can be found, from the nests of stingless bees hidden in hollow trees, and even from the more aggressive, stinging kinds, whose combs must be raided with smoke and speed. And then there are the smaller foods, the ones that outsiders sometimes flinch from. Palm grubs, thick, pale larvae that develop inside fallen palm trunks, are gathered by the handful and roasted on green sticks until they crackle. They taste, by many accounts, like buttered chestnuts. Certain species of ants, especially large winged queens that emerge in swarms after heavy rain, are collected in leaf packets and dried. Termites, when their nests are opened, come out as a rich, fatty meat. Turtles, slow and heavy from the riverside, are prized, both for their meat and their eggs laid in season on sandbanks. Freshwater snails and crabs from the shallows are dropped straight onto the coals. None of this is casual foraging. All of it depends on knowledge, on knowing which grubs are safe and which are bitter, which fruits look tempting but are toxic, which mushrooms of the many that sprout after rain are food and which are death, which caterpillars bear only harmless bristles, and which carry a sting that will keep an arm swollen for days. In a place where almost every plant has evolved chemical defenses against being eaten, choosing what to put in the mouth is an act of continuous, careful learning. Fire is a mystery of its own in the rainforest. In a landscape where nothing is truly dry, where fallen branches lie waterlogged on the ground, and where even the air is saturated with moisture, keeping a flame alive is a daily accomplishment. Yet in every shabono and every stilt house, fire is central to life. It cooks the food, it dries the clothes and hammocks and weapons, it hardens the tips of arrows. It smolders through the long nights and keeps the biting insects at bay. The smoke of the domestic hearth is one of the constants of Amazonian life, hanging in the leaf roofs like a slow, blue mist. To make a new fire, people use several methods, depending on what materials are around. One traditional way is the fire drill, a hardwood spindle spun quickly between the palms of the hands against a softer wooden hearthboard, its tip generating a small pile of glowing dust that can be tipped into a nest of dry tinder. That tinder must be prepared in advance and stored carefully, because it is one of the few dry things anywhere in the forest. Fibers from certain barks, teased into a fluff, are ideal. Once caught, the ember must be blown gently, coaxed patiently, until it flares into flame. It is much easier to keep a fire than to make one from scratch. In many households, the hearth is never allowed to go completely out. Before sleep, the burning logs are pulled apart so that they smolder without flaming. A layer of ash is drawn over them like a blanket. In the morning, the ash is brushed aside, fresh tinder is added, and breath restores the fire. When people travel, they often carry an ember with them, wrapped in leaves, inside a hollow gourd, so that the first camp of the journey can be lit without effort. Cooking itself is done directly on the coals or on wooden racks over them. Meat is smoked slowly for days over a low fire to preserve it, since fresh meat in this heat will spoil overnight. The smoked, hardened flesh keeps for a long time and can be shared, carried, or hung in a rafter for later use. Vegetables are wrapped in leaves and buried in the ashes. Fish are threaded onto skewers and stood upright around a small fire, roasting from all sides at once. The hearth is also a place of protection. Smoke, which humans learn to tolerate, is intolerable to many of the smaller creatures that would otherwise share the sleeping space. Mosquitoes are far fewer in a smoky roof. Sandflies keep their distance. In the dim, blue haze of the Shabono, the constant low burn of the family fires holds off a whole invisible army. Because there is a whole invisible army, and a visible one too, the Amazon is not a place for the careless. Everything in this forest, it sometimes seems, either bites or stings or poisons. Mosquitoes carry malaria, yellow fever, and dengue. Sandflies carry leishmaniasis, which can eat away skin over months. Ticks, chiggers, tiny worms called filaria, all pass through human bodies in various ways. Standing water is never quite safe. Cuts on the skin in this hot, damp world turn into infected sores within hours if they are not carefully attended. Above the size of an insect, the dangers grow larger. Snakes are everywhere, from tiny coral snakes hidden among fallen leaves to the giant fer-de-lance, a heavy pit viper whose bite can kill an adult without prompt treatment. The bushmaster, the largest venomous snake in the Americas, prowls at night. In the rivers, the anaconda, a great constrictor that can grow to more than 7 meters, drifts in shallow water where the caiman also floats, only the eyes and nostrils showing. Some frogs, brilliantly colored little jewels on the forest floor, carry on their skins some of the most toxic substances known to biology. A single lick from a curious dog or a careless finger to the mouth can be enough to cause serious harm. Certain caterpillars bristle with hollow spines full of venom. There are freshwater stingrays that lie flat on sandy river bottoms, whose whipping tail can drive a barbed spine into a foot and cause weeks of agony. There are electric eels that can stun a person with a single discharge. There are piranhas, whose reputation is overstated, but whose bite is still a thing to respect. The jaguar, the great spotted cat of the Americas, is a rarer danger, mostly avoiding people, but its presence is always in the mind. It appears in dreams, in stories, in carvings and body paint. Some peoples believe that great shamans can take the form of jaguars in the spirit world, and that the boundary between human and jaguar is thinner than an outsider would suppose. Even a hunter who has never seen a jaguar in the flesh will know its calls, will know the pattern of its tracks, will know how to read a scratched tree trunk marked by claws. The rivers themselves are a hazard. When the rains are heavy and prolonged, whole floodplains submerge. Familiar paths disappear underwater. Trees fall. Currents shift and dig new channels. Standing water breeds mosquitoes in vast numbers. Communities in low-lying areas may have to relocate to higher ground for months at a time, moving their possessions in canoes, waiting patiently for the waters to withdraw. In this climate, the calendar is written in flood marks on the trunks of trees. Against so many dangers, the peoples of the Amazon have developed one of the greatest bodies of botanical knowledge in the world. In some regions, a single community can name and use hundreds of plants, drawing on them for food, tools, dyes, weapons, glues, resins, poisons, and medicines. Their pharmacology is oral, embedded in memory and in practice, passed down among knowledgeable elders and refined by generations of trial and observation. For headaches and fevers, various barks are boiled to make bitter teas. One of the most famous is the bark of the cinchona tree from the western fringes of the basin, whose active substance, quinine, later formed the foundation of the world's first effective treatment for malaria. For wounds and skin infections, resins from copaiba and dragon's blood trees are applied directly, forming a natural antiseptic seal. For stomach illnesses, roots and leaves are chewed or infused. For pain, the leaves of certain solanums are used, or the sap of trees like the sangre de drago, the dragon's blood tree, whose red latex is astonishing to see. There are plants used against snakebite, some of which modern science has begun to study seriously in the last few decades. There are plants for tiredness, for sore muscles, for arthritis, for the dozens of small ailments that any adult body accumulates over years of forest work. There are plants for insect bites, including infusions rubbed on the skin as insect repellents. There are plants that cause vomiting, used deliberately to clear the stomach, and plants that bind the belly, used against dysentery. The people who hold this knowledge do not think of it in the same way outsiders sometimes describe it. For them, the medicinal plant is not a bottle of active ingredients. It is a living presence, often connected to a spirit, or to a way of behaving, or to a certain place in the forest. To harvest a medicine well, one must approach the plant with respect, must take only what is needed, must sometimes leave a small offering, must speak certain words. In this view, healing is not only chemistry, it is also relationship. That view, that the forest is a web of relationships and not a warehouse of resources, sits at the heart of much of Amazonian spiritual life. In many of these societies, the world is not divided into humans on one side and everything else on the other. Instead, it is populated by many kinds of beings, each with its own point of view, its own preferences, its own history. Animals, plants, rivers, mountains, thunderstorms, all can be understood as persons of a different kind. To live well in this world is to negotiate with all of them, to keep the balance, to give and receive without demanding too much. The person most responsible for tending these relationships is the shaman. Every community has one or several. A shaman is not simply a healer or a priest, though those roles overlap. A shaman is a specialist in crossing between worlds, in seeing what ordinary sight cannot see, in speaking with the spirits of animals and plants, in diagnosing not just illness of the body, but illness of the community and the land. Becoming a shaman takes many years and often involves long periods of restriction, isolation, and disciplined study under an older master. In their work, shamans of many Amazonian peoples use plant preparations that outsiders have come to call sacred medicines. The Yanomami, for example, use a fine powder made from the seeds and bark of certain trees, especially varieties of virola. This powder, blown by one person into the nostrils of another through a long hollow cane, opens up a state of altered awareness in which the shaman perceives the spirits, called hekura, and works with them to protect the community, to hunt for the causes of illness, to guide the balance of the world. Elsewhere in the Amazon, other peoples use different preparations, most famously the vine brew known in the wider world as ayahuasca, made by boiling a specific vine together with certain leaves. Its effects and the ceremonies around it differ considerably from one people to another. In every case, however, these substances are not casual entertainments. They are tools, held inside a serious body of knowledge, used with intention, framed by prayer and by song. To describe them fully belongs to the peoples themselves, not to outsiders. It is enough to say that they occupy a place at the meeting of medicine and spirituality that Western thought has not quite managed to put a name to. What can be said with confidence is that the shaman is a figure of enormous responsibility. When a hunter falls sick, the shaman is asked why. When game grows scarce, the shaman is asked what has been broken in the compact between people and forest. When a strong wind topples a great tree over a footpath, the shaman may be asked what the tree wanted to say. In this way, the spiritual life of the community is not separate from its practical life. They are the same conversation, held on two different levels at once. The songs of the shaman are one of the most beautiful traditions of the Amazon. Long, patient, often quiet, they call the spirits by name, describe their qualities, invite them to come near. They are, in a very real sense, a mapping of the forest in sound. Each species of tree and vine, each spirit of a river or a stone, each animal has its own melody, its own words. To learn them all is the work of a lifetime, and even then, no shaman would claim to know everything. Around this deep center, the ordinary life of the community goes on. Baskets are woven from split cane and vines, dyed in patterns whose meanings are remembered by those who make them. Hammocks are twisted from strong plant fibers. Pots of clay are shaped and fired. Feathers of macaws and toucans and cotingas are worked into ornaments for celebrations and ritual dances. Bodies are painted, sometimes with the deep red of achiote seeds, sometimes with the blue-black of genipop fruit, in patterns that carry meaning about status, about mood, about occasion. Voices sing, laugh, argue, tell long stories that unfold across whole evenings around the hearth. Food is shared as a matter of course. A hunter who has killed a large tapir does not eat it alone with his household. He distributes portions among many hearths and expects the same when another family has good fortune. Meat, honey, gathered fruit all move constantly around the shabono in an economy of open hands. To be selfish is a serious moral failing, more serious in many Amazonian societies than almost any other. The forest is generous, and its people mirror that generosity in the way they treat each other. This is not, of course, a paradise. Amazonian life is hard. Disease and hunger and grief are real. Communities have their disagreements, their rivalries, their conflicts. Different nations have fought each other over the centuries. The past has known cruelty as well as kindness, as in every human society. To describe these peoples as living in perpetual harmony would be another kind of exoticism, another kind of failure to see them as fully human. What is true is that they have built ways of living inside one of the most demanding environments on the planet, and that those ways of living are intricate, considered, and old. That is why what is happening today is a tragedy in the most exact sense of the word. Across the whole Amazon basin, the forest is under attack. Vast tracts are cleared each year for cattle ranches, for soya fields, for illegal logging. Rivers are dredged and poisoned by wildcat gold miners, whose mercury pollution moves up the food chain and settles in the flesh of the fish that people eat. Roads push into once remote areas, bringing traffic, alcohol, disease, and land speculation. Fires, some deliberately set, escape into the standing forest during drought years and burn areas that had not seen flame in centuries. For the peoples of the forest, this is not an abstract environmental issue. It is the destruction of home. When the trees fall, the game disappears. When the rivers are poisoned, the fish sicken. When outsiders arrive, epidemics of diseases against which the community has no acquired resistance can sweep through a settlement in weeks. The Yanomami in particular, whose lands overlap some of the most heavily mined regions of the western Amazon, have suffered severely from this pressure. Whole communities have been displaced, weakened by hunger, exposed to unfamiliar illnesses. Malaria, brought or intensified by the miners, has become chronic in many areas. At the same time, the peoples of the forest are not passive. Across Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and beyond, indigenous organizations have taken up the difficult work of defending their territories. They map their lands. They meet with governments and international bodies. They speak in courtrooms and in conferences. They partner with scientists and journalists and lawyers. They insist again and again, in their own languages and in the borrowed languages of politics, that their forest is not empty, not marginal, not merely a resource to be used up. There is growing evidence that they are right, and that their approach to the forest is not only ancient, but effective. Satellite studies show that indigenous territories in the Amazon are among the best preserved regions of the whole basin. Where the land is under the care of its traditional peoples, the trees still stand. Where it is not, deforestation accelerates. The lesson is not that the forest belongs to a museum, nor that its people should be frozen in a fixed way of life. It is that living cultures, adapted over thousands of years to a specific place, are among the best guardians of that place when they are given the space and the security to continue. To end, then, let us return to the beginning. The hunter, still crouched under the drumming rain, hears at last the sound he was waiting for. High above, a monkey moves. He lifts his blowgun, breathes in a long, steady breath, and releases the dart. Whether it strikes true or misses is only one small moment in a life woven of thousands of such moments. But behind that single shot lies a long chain of knowledge. The tree that supplied the wood for the blowgun, the vine that supplied the poison, the bark that made the string of the loincloth around his waist, the house of leaves waiting for him at the end of the day, the fire that will roast his kill, the songs that will be sung tonight when the rain finally softens and the forest breathes out. None of it is accidental. All of it is the result of centuries of patient learning, held in memory and in the muscles of skilled hands, tested against a world that punishes carelessness. The Amazon is not a green hell. It is a great living library in which the peoples of the forest are both readers and authors. Their pages are written not on paper, which would rot within days, but in gesture, in speech, in ritual, in the careful weaving of a basket, in the naming of a plant, in the drum of the rain on a thatched roof. They are here still, these peoples, on their rivers and under their canopies, walking their old trails and defending their homes against the encroaching outside world. They are not relics. They are contemporaries. They are among us on the same planet at the same hour, breathing the same atmosphere that their forest, more than almost any other, helps to hold together. To listen to them, to see them clearly, to defend the standing of their forest, is not charity. It is one of the more urgent forms of common sense left to our shared human family. The rain falls, the trees stand, and inside the great green library, the reading continues.